The cathedral was filled with the kind of silence that only exists before something important begins. 300 guests sat shoulder to shoulder beneath towering stained glass windows. Sunlight poured through the colored panels, painting the marble floor with soft blues and golds. Expensive perfume lingered in the air. Camera flashes blinked quietly from the back rows where journalists had been allowed to document what social media had already called the wedding of the year. At the altar stood Raphael Anderson, billionaire, founder of one of the largest logistics companies in the country. A man who had climbed out of poverty and built an empire powerful enough to make presidents return his phone calls. Beside him stood Clara Whitmore, breathtaking in a white gown that shimmered beneath the cathedral lights. The daughter of a powerful business dynasty. Elegant, composed, perfect. Together they looked unstoppable. The priest opened his book. Guests leaned forward. The music swelled. And then, chaos. The massive wooden doors at the back of the cathedral burst open. A small figure sprinted inside. A girl. Thin. Dirty. Barefoot. Her torn hoodie flapped as she ran down the center aisle, weaving between shocked guests before security guards even understood what was happening. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Stop her," someone shouted. But she was already halfway to the altar. The girl reached Raphael first. She grabbed his arm with both hands, trembling, her eyes wide with desperation, and screamed at the top of her lungs, "Dad, don't marry her." The music stopped instantly. The entire cathedral froze. 300 guests turned toward the girl. Raphael stared down at her in stunned silence. Something about her face felt strangely familiar. Then she leaned closer and whispered urgently, "Please, I only need 5 seconds." And suddenly the perfect wedding no longer felt perfect at all. For a moment nobody moved. The priest stood frozen at the altar. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. Even the security guards hesitated, unsure whether to drag the girl away or wait for Raphael's reaction. Because in that single moment, something impossible had just happened. A homeless child had walked into one of the most powerful weddings in the city, looked a billionaire in the eye, and called him Dad. What nobody inside that cathedral understood yet was that in less than 5 seconds the truth about this wedding would begin to unravel. And when it did, everything would collapse. But before we continue, if you believe the truth should always come out, even when it threatens the powerful, take a moment to subscribe and join us. Because stories like this deserve to be told. Now let's go back to the beginning, where this story really started. To understand why that moment inside the cathedral shocked everyone, you first have to understand the 3 people whose lives were about to collide. The first was Raphael Anderson. 10 years earlier, Raphael had been just another young man struggling to survive in the crowded streets of Lagos. His father died when he was 14, leaving his mother to raise 3 children while selling vegetables in a roadside market. Money was always short. Electricity came and went. Some nights dinner was nothing more than bread and tea. But Raphael had something most people around him didn't. Relentless determination. He started small, delivering packages on a borrowed motorcycle. Then he bought a van. Then another. Within a decade, that tiny delivery hustle had grown into Anderson Logistics, a billion-dollar company moving cargo across West Africa. The world called him a billionaire. But the people who knew him best called him something else. A man who never forgot where he came from. Every year, Raphael poured millions into the Anderson Foundation, funding food programs, shelters, and scholarships for children who had nothing, because once upon a time he had been one of them. Yet despite his success, there was one shadow that never quite left him. Raphael Anderson was a widower. The woman he loved had died years ago, and since then he had kept his personal life carefully guarded, until Clara Whitmore entered the picture. Clara was everything the media adored. Beautiful. Sophisticated. The daughter of one of the most influential real estate families in the country. When she and Raphael began appearing together at charity galas and business events, society magazines declared them the perfect power couple. And now they were getting married. But far away from luxury hotels and magazine headlines, there was a third life unfolding quietly in the shadows of the very cathedral where the ceremony was taking place. Her name was Lena. She was 12 years old. And for the past 2 years she had been living on the streets. She slept wherever she could, under bridges, behind closed shops, sometimes in abandoned buses. But on cold nights, when the city became dangerous, Lena had a secret hiding place. Inside the cathedral. Behind the very last wooden bench. No one ever noticed her there. No one ever imagined that a homeless girl could be watching, listening, learning, and most importantly, discovering a secret that could destroy a billionaire's wedding before it even began. Long before the wedding guests filled the cathedral with perfume and expensive laughter, the building meant something very different to Lena. To most people, the cathedral was a place for ceremonies, prayers, and quiet reflection. To Lena, it was survival. She had discovered the hidden entrance almost by accident during a rainy night 2 years earlier. Behind the building, near the maintenance corridor, there was a narrow window that didn't close properly. If you pushed it just right, it would slide open enough for a small body to squeeze through. Lena had learned to move silently. Once inside, she always followed the same routine. First, she checked the main hall to make sure the place was empty. Then she walked quietly down the aisle and slipped behind the final row of benches where shadows covered the floor. That corner became her shelter. She kept a thin blanket hidden beneath the bench and an old backpack tucked behind a pillar. Most nights she lay there listening to the soft echo of the city outside while the tall stained-glass windows glowed faintly in the moonlight. The cathedral felt different from the streets. Safer, cleaner, almost peaceful. During the day she stayed outside, blending into the crowd of street vendors and pedestrians. From there she watched the wealthy people who came to pray or attend events. She noticed the expensive cars, the polished shoes, the confident laughter of people who never worried about their next meal. And occasionally, she noticed Raphael Anderson, the man who ran the charity foundation that once gave her a hot meal when she had nothing else. But one night everything changed, because instead of darkness and silence, the cathedral lights turned on, and voices echoed through the hall. Lena woke instantly. At first she thought she was dreaming. People were never inside the cathedral that late at night. She lifted her head slowly, holding her breath. The voices were coming from the sacristy, a small room beside the altar where church staff stored ceremonial robes and documents. The door was slightly open. Light spilled across the marble floor. Curiosity pulled Lena closer. She crawled quietly between the pews until she reached a position near the front of the church where she could hear clearly without being seen. Then she froze. Because the woman speaking was Clara Whitmore. Lena had seen her before on large posters announcing the upcoming wedding. Clara's voice sounded different now. Colder. Sharper. So once the ceremony ends, Clara said calmly, the marriage certificate activates the agreement automatically. A man replied, his voice thin and precise. Her lawyer. Yes. The contract ensures joint ownership of all assets immediately. Another voice joined in. A deeper voice. The business partner. And the power of attorney? Clara laughed softly. That comes later, she said. Raphael trusts me completely. During the honeymoon he'll sign the documents without even reading them. The lawyer chuckled. And then you control everything. Clara's heels clicked across the floor as she walked. Exactly, she said. The companies. The investments. The real estate. She paused. And most importantly, the foundation. The business partner sounded surprised. You want that too? Clara scoffed. Of course. Do you know how much money flows through that charity every year? Millions. And it's all being wasted on poor people. The words hit Lena like a slap. Clara continued casually. Once I take control, those funds will be redirected into our private holdings. The lawyer laughed again. Raphael won't know what hit him. Lena's stomach twisted. Because suddenly she understood everything. Clara wasn't marrying Raphael for love. She was marrying him for control. For the next several minutes, Lena remained frozen behind the bench. Her mind raced. The conversation continued inside the sacristy. More talk about contracts, bank transfers, and ways to move money quietly after the wedding. But Lena barely heard it anymore. She was thinking about Raphael. About the day his foundation volunteers handed her a warm bowl of rice and stew. The first real meal she had eaten in 3 days. They had given her clean water, a blanket, and told her something she had never forgotten. Mr. Anderson believes every child deserves a chance. At the time, Lena had never imagined she would meet the man behind the foundation. But now she had just overheard a plan that could destroy everything he built. Her first instinct was simple. Tell someone. Go to the police. But reality returned quickly. The police wouldn't believe a homeless child accusing a billionaire's fiancé. Security guards would throw her out before she even reached Raphael. And even if someone listened, she had no proof. Just words. And words weren't enough to stop a wedding that powerful. Lena sat in the shadows thinking for a long time. Finally she made a decision. If no one would believe her, she would make them believe. She would gather proof. Real proof. But to do that, she would have to get closer to the people planning the crime. The next night Lena came prepared. Inside her backpack was an old smartphone she had found months earlier in a trash bin behind a restaurant. The screen was cracked and the battery barely lasted an hour, but it still had one useful feature. A voice recorder. She waited behind the last bench until the cathedral lights flickered on again. The same voices returned. Claire. Her lawyer. The business partner. Lena's heart pounded. This was her chance. Moving slowly, she crawled closer to the sacristy door and placed the phone on the floor, pointing toward the opening. Then she pressed record. The tiny red light blinked. Inside the room, Clara was speaking again. After the wedding, the first transfer begins immediately. Lena held her breath. Everything was working. Until suddenly, the screen went dark. Battery dead. Lena felt panic rush through her chest. She grabbed the phone quickly. And in that exact moment, the sacristy door creaked open. Footsteps echoed into the hall. Did you hear something? The lawyer asked. Lena flattened herself behind a column, barely breathing. Clara stepped into the cathedral and looked around suspiciously. For several terrifying seconds, it seemed like she might walk straight toward Lena's hiding place. Then the business partner spoke from inside the room. Probably just the wind. Clara hesitated. Then she turned back. The door closed again. Only after several minutes passed did Lena dare move. Her first attempt had failed. And now she understood something chilling. If Clara discovered someone had been listening, that person might never be seen again. Lena barely slept that night. The failure of her first attempt haunted her. She had been so close. But she also understood something important now. The meetings inside the sacristy were happening regularly, which meant she would get another chance. The next day she searched the city for a way to charge her dying phone. Eventually she found an outdoor electrical outlet behind a closed shop near the cathedral. She waited until evening, plugged the phone in, and watched the battery slowly climb back to life. 10%, 20, 30. It felt like preparing for a mission. When darkness returned, Lena slipped back into the cathedral through her hidden window. The lights were off. Everything was quiet. She waited behind the benches. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Finally, just before midnight, the lights switched on again. Lena's heart raced. Voices echoed through the hall as Clara and the two men entered the sacristy. Lena moved carefully into position. This time she slid the phone under the door itself, where the microphone could capture every word clearly. Then she pressed record. Inside the room, Clara spoke confidently. Once Raphael signs the final papers, the company shares transfer automatically. The lawyer replied calmly. Half becomes yours by law. Those words sent a chill down Lena's spine. Half becomes yours by law. Clara laughed softly. And the rest follows soon after. For nearly 20 minutes the phone captured everything. The plan. The documents. The foundation takeover. When the voices finally faded and the door opened again, Lena had already retrieved the phone and retreated into the shadows. Back behind the last bench she replayed the recording. The voices were clear. Every word. She finally had proof. But the danger had only just begun. The following night something felt different. Lena sensed it the moment she slipped back inside the cathedral. The sacristy door was already open. Clara stood inside with her lawyer holding a folder of documents. But her expression was tense. Suspicious. I'm telling you someone was here, Clara said sharply. The lawyer frowned. You think someone overheard us? I know they did, Clara replied. Yesterday I heard movement outside the door. The business partner shifted nervously. Then we need to move faster. Clara nodded. The wedding will happen earlier than planned. We finish this before anyone has time to interfere. Then her voice dropped lower. And find out who has been hiding in this church. The lawyer hesitated. What do you mean? Clara looked directly at him. If someone heard our conversation they could ruin everything. Silence filled the room. Then Clara added coldly. Find them. And if they talk. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The threat hung in the air. Outside the room, Lena's pulse hammered in her ears. Clara was hunting for the witness. Hunting for her. For the first time since discovering the plan, Lena felt real fear. Not just fear of being ignored. Fear of disappearing. The next afternoon Lena returned to the cathedral courtyard. Workers were already decorating for the wedding. Flowers lined the entrance. Luxury cars passed by. Everything looked normal. But Lena knew the truth hiding beneath the celebration. That evening she hid again near the sacristy. Clara arrived briefly with her lawyer. They carried a thick document folder. When they left the room, Lena slipped forward quickly. The door was still slightly open. Inside, the folder lay on the table. She grabbed her phone. Snapped photos as fast as she could. Contract pages. Legal stamps. Signatures waiting to be completed. Then she heard footsteps returning. Lena grabbed the phone and ran back into the shadows. Her heart raced as she reviewed the photos. Now she had more than just the recording. She had documents proving the plan. Audio. Paper. Evidence. But the wedding was only hours away. And Clara was already searching for whoever knew the truth. At this point, the story pauses for a moment. Because what Lena was about to do next would terrify most adults. Imagine being 12 years old. Homeless. Alone. And knowing that powerful people were searching for you. Not to thank you. But to silence you. Yet at the same time, knowing that if you stayed quiet, a good man would lose everything he built. His companies. His charity. The foundation feeding thousands of people. Lena stood outside that cathedral for a long time that night, holding the phone that contained the truth. She had a choice. Walk away and stay safe. Or step into a room filled with powerful strangers. And accuse a billionaire's bride of betrayal. So ask yourself something honestly. If you were that girl, would you risk everything to tell the truth? If your answer is yes, stay with this story. Because what happened next inside that cathedral would shock everyone. By early afternoon, the entire street outside the cathedral had transformed into a spectacle. Luxury cars lined the curb, sleek black sedans, imported SUVs, and chauffeurs opening doors for elegantly dressed guests stepping out in polished shoes and flowing gowns. Media cameras flashed constantly. Reporters whispered into microphones while social media influencers filmed clips of the arriving crowd. Inside the cathedral, the atmosphere felt electric. Rows of white roses decorated the aisle. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across the marble floor. The string quartet warmed up quietly near the altar. At the center of it all stood Raphael Anderson. Tall, calm, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. To everyone watching, he looked like a man stepping confidently into the next chapter of his life. Near the entrance, Clara Whitmore appeared moments later, stepping gracefully from her car in a breathtaking white gown that shimmered under the afternoon sun. Photographers erupted with excitement. She smiled for the cameras, flawless and composed. No one could see the ambition hidden beneath that perfect smile. Across the street, hidden behind a parked delivery van, Lena watched everything. Her hands trembled as she held the phone inside her pocket. The same phone containing the recording that could destroy the wedding. She watched as guests disappeared into the cathedral. Watched as the doors slowly closed. Watched as the moment she had feared all night finally arrived. Lena swallowed hard. Her heart pounded so loudly she could feel it in her throat. Inside her mind, she repeated the same words again and again like a prayer. 5 seconds. 5 seconds. 5 seconds is all you need. Then she stepped out from behind the van and walked toward the cathedral doors. 2 large security guards stood at the entrance of the cathedral. They noticed Lena immediately. Her worn clothes. Her tangled hair. The nervous way she approached the doors. One guard stepped forward. Hey, stop right there. Lena froze. This is a private event, the guard said sternly. Move along. I need to talk to Raphael Anderson, Lena said quickly. The guard laughed. You and half the city, kid. I'm serious, she insisted. It's important. The second guard shook his head. Not happening. He reached toward her pocket. What's that you're holding? Lena stepped back instinctively. Nothing, she said. Let me see it, the guard demanded. Guests walking into the cathedral glanced over curiously. A few whispered to each other. One woman wrinkled her nose. Why is that street kid even here? Embarrassment burned in Lena's chest. But she didn't leave. She couldn't. The guard moved closer, reaching for the phone again. If you don't leave now, we'll call the police. Desperation surged through Lena. Before she could stop herself, she shouted as loudly as she could. Raphael Anderson. The guards froze. Her voice echoed through the open cathedral doors. Lena took a breath and shouted again. Raphael Anderson. Your foundation saved my life. Inside the cathedral, the music paused. And at the altar, Raphael turned toward the entrance. A murmur spread through the cathedral as Raphael stepped away from the altar and walked down the aisle. Guests twisted in their seats, trying to see what had caused the disruption. The security guards straightened nervously. Sir, we're handling it, one of them said. But Raphael raised his hand. Let her speak. The guards reluctantly stepped aside. Lena suddenly felt the weight of hundreds of eyes staring at her. Raphael stopped a few feet away. Up close he looked different than he had on television. Older. More tired. But his voice remained calm. What's your name? He asked. Lena, she said quietly. How do you know my fiancé? Raphael asked. Lena hesitated. Then she reached into her pocket and held up the phone. I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear. Raphael frowned. And what exactly do you want from me? Lena looked directly into his eyes. For a moment, the entire cathedral seemed to hold its breath. I don't want anything, she said. Her voice trembled slightly. Then she added softly. Just 5 seconds. Lena pressed play. At first, only static crackled through the phone speaker. Then a familiar voice echoed clearly through the silent cathedral. Clara's voice. Once the ceremony ends, the marriage contract activates automatically. Guests exchanged confused glances. Raphael's expression stiffened. The recording continued. Half becomes mine by law. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Raphael's eyes slowly turned toward Clara. Her smile had vanished. Before anyone could react, Clara lunged forward suddenly. Give me that phone, she snapped. But Raphael moved faster. He grabbed Clara's wrist and pulled the phone out of her reach. The recording kept playing. And with every word that echoed through the cathedral, the truth began to emerge. For a few seconds, the only sound inside the cathedral was Clara's recorded voice echoing from Lena's small phone. Then Raphael made a decision. Without saying a word, he turned and walked back toward the altar where the church's sound system microphone stood. The guests watched him in stunned silence. Raphael connected the phone to the audio cable used for the ceremony music. The speakers above the cathedral ceiling crackled to life. Then Clara's voice exploded across the entire room. Once the ceremony ends, the marriage certificate activates the agreement automatically. 300 guests froze. The lawyer sitting in the third row went pale. The recording continued. Half becomes mine by law. Gasps rippled through the cathedral. Raphael stood perfectly still as the rest of the conversation played out, Clara laughing about controlling the foundation, mocking the charity work, discussing how Raphael trusted her too much to question the documents she would ask him to sign. When the recording ended, silence filled the cathedral. Then chaos erupted. Guests stood up, whispering furiously. Some pulled out phones. Others stared at Clara with disbelief. Near the aisle, Clara's lawyer quietly rose from his seat and began moving toward the exit. Raphael noticed. "Stop him." The command cut through the room like a blade. The security guards at the doors reacted instantly. They blocked the lawyer before he could escape. Clara's composure shattered. "This is fake," she shouted suddenly, her voice sharp with panic. "That recording is edited. Someone is trying to sabotage our wedding." Her voice echoed through the room, but the confidence that once filled it was gone. Raphael said nothing. Instead, he turned slowly toward Lena. "Show them." Lena hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. She opened her phone gallery and handed Raphael the images she had taken. Photographs of the contract. Legal documents. Signature pages waiting for Raphael to sign. The room fell silent again as Raphael held the phone up for everyone to see. Clara's lawyer stopped struggling against the guards. Because the truth was undeniable. A distant siren echoed outside. Minutes later, 2 police officers entered the cathedral. The whispers stopped. Raphael took a breath before speaking clearly. "The wedding is cancelled." Clara stared at him in disbelief as the officers approached her. "You can't be serious," she whispered. But Raphael didn't answer. The handcuffs clicked shut around Clara's wrists. And just like that, the wedding of the year collapsed in front of everyone. Moments like this make people uncomfortable. Because they force us to ask a difficult question. What matters more? Power or truth? Clara had wealth, influence, and a room full of powerful guests ready to celebrate her wedding. But the truth didn't come from a politician. It didn't come from a business rival. It came from a 12-year-old girl with nothing but courage and a cracked phone. And in the end, that was enough. So if you believe justice should always matter more than power, take a moment to subscribe and stay with us. Because stories like this remind us that sometimes the smallest voice in the room can change everything. And Lena's story isn't over yet. The cathedral slowly emptied. Guests whispered to each other as they left, still stunned by what they had witnessed. The police escorted Clara and her lawyer outside while reporters rushed forward with cameras and microphones. But Raphael stayed inside, sitting alone in the front pew. His tuxedo jacket lay folded beside him. His hands rested on his knees. For several minutes he didn't move. The weight of everything that had almost happened pressed down on him. The betrayal. The humiliation. The realization that the woman he had planned to marry had never loved him at all. Worse than the money she almost stole was the thought of what she planned to do to the foundation. The one thing in his life that truly mattered. Raphael lowered his head. His shoulders shook slightly as he exhaled. Across the room, Lena stood quietly near the entrance, unsure whether she should stay or leave. Finally Raphael looked up. His eyes found her immediately. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Raphael slowly stood. He walked down the aisle until he reached her. Up close, Lena noticed something she hadn't expected. The billionaire looked tired. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "You saved me," he said. He glanced back toward the empty cathedral. "And you saved a lot more than that." Raphael looked down at the phone still in Lena's hand. Then he looked back at her. And for the first time since the chaos began, he smiled. The city outside the cathedral was still buzzing with reporters and flashing cameras. But Raphael avoided all of it. Instead of answering questions or giving interviews, he quietly led Lena through a side exit and into the back seat of a waiting car. For a while neither of them spoke. The silence felt strange after everything that had just happened. Finally Raphael looked at her gently. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Lena hesitated. Then she nodded. 15 minutes later they sat inside a quiet restaurant across town, far away from the chaos of the wedding. The waiter placed a plate of hot food in front of Lena. She stared at it for a moment like it might disappear. Then she began eating quickly. Raphael watched quietly, saying nothing. Only when Lena slowed down did he speak again. "How long have you been on the streets?" Lena wiped her mouth nervously. 2 years. Raphael's brow tightened. "What happened to your family?" "My mom died," she said softly. After that there was no one. The words hung heavy in the air. Raphael leaned back in his chair, absorbing what she had just told him. 2 years. A 12-year-old child surviving alone in the same city where billionaires planned luxury weddings. The contrast felt unbearable. "You stayed in the cathedral?" he asked. Lena nodded. "Behind the benches." Raphael looked down at the table for a moment before speaking again. "You could have walked away today," he said. "No one would have blamed you." Lena shrugged slightly. "Your foundation helped me once," she said quietly. "I thought maybe I could help you back." For the first time that evening Raphael smiled fully. Then he made a decision. "Come on," he said standing. "Where are we going?" Lena asked. "Home." Later that night, Lena stepped into the largest house she had ever seen. Raphael showed her the bathroom first. Hot water filled the tub. Clean clothes waited on the counter. Afterward she ate again. Then Raphael led her upstairs to a quiet guest room with a soft bed and fresh blankets. He paused at the door before leaving. "Tonight," he said gently, "you're safe." For the first time in 2 years, Lena slept without fear. 6 months later, the Anderson Foundation looked very different. After the scandal surrounding the cancelled weddings spread through the media, donations to the foundation had nearly doubled. People across the country had heard the story of the homeless girl who stopped a billionaire's wedding with a single recording, and many wanted to help. Raphael used the attention carefully. New shelters opened in 2 cities. Scholarship programs expanded. Food programs reached thousands more families. But the biggest change happened quietly. Inside Raphael's home. Every weekday morning, Lena now walked out the front door wearing a school uniform and carrying a backpack filled with books. School hadn't been easy at first. 2 years on the street had left gaps in her education. But Lena worked harder than anyone in her class. And every afternoon after homework was finished, she often visited the foundation office with Raphael. There she helped organize donation boxes and pack food kits for families in need. The volunteers loved her. Because Lena understood the people they were helping better than anyone else. One afternoon, as they watched volunteers load supplies into delivery trucks, Raphael handed Lena a document. She read the title slowly. Adoption Papers. Her eyes widened. "You're serious?" she whispered. Raphael smiled. "I've never been more serious about anything." Lena threw her arms around him without another word. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Raphael stood outside the foundation building watching Lena laugh with the volunteers. And he thought about the moment that had changed everything. 5 seconds. That was all it had taken. 5 seconds of courage. 5 seconds of truth. 5 seconds that saved him from losing everything. And 5 seconds that saved a little girl from a life on the streets. Because in the end, family isn't always the people you're born with. Sometimes, family is the person brave enough to tell you the truth when it matters most.